Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guests today are Catherine Zhou and Megan Crespi in an interview conducted at a recent MetaStrategy Digital Symposium. Catherine is the Global Head of Ventures for Digital Innovation and Partnerships at HSBC, a financial services giant with revenues exceeding $56 billion annually. Megan is the Chief Operations and Technology Officer for Comerica Bank, a more than 150-year-old bank with revenues exceeding $3 billion annually. In this interview, we discuss how barriers to digital adoption are dissolving out of necessity, how Comerica has transformed to enhance the customer experience and is using the pandemic as an opportunity to break down barriers and reach new demographics as work becomes more remote. We also discuss three areas HSBC looks at regarding innovation and profit pools: big tech, the Eastern Hemisphere, and FinTech, and why it's every person's job to innovate at HSBC, not just the innovation team's job, and a variety of other topics. If you enjoy Technovation, please consider reading my new book, Getting to Nimble: How to Transform Your Company into a Digital Leader. The book's now available on Amazon or wherever else you buy books. As a special offer to our CXO listeners, if you purchase the book for you and your team, I'd be happy to join your team for a group discussion on it. To learn more, write us at information@metastrategy.com or visit gettingtonimble.com. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation, technology and innovation in financial services. I'm joined by Megan Crespi, the Chief Operations and Technology Officer of Comerica Bank, as well as Catherine Zhou, the Global Head of Venture, Digital Innovation, and Partnerships at HSBC. Ladies, it's great to see you both.
Great to be here.
Great to be here, Peter.
Excellent. Well, so I'd love to, Megan, start with you, if I may. You, as I mentioned, are the Chief Operations and Technology Officer of Comerica, a role you took on almost exactly when we all went into quarantine. We'll get to that very point in a moment. I got to know you initially when you were the Chief Technology Officer of Ally. You were at Ally for some time, and General Motors prior to that. And I thought we would begin, last time you and I had a chance to catch up, you were talking about how during this time of pandemic quarantine, the changes that so many of us have had to go through as a result of this, there have been some surprising conclusions about digital adoption. Some of it one might expect that the digital native folks among us, those younger than all of us, took to this in various ways that were mind-boggling because of their fluency of what for many of us were becoming the new ways of living, new ways of working. However, it wasn't limited to them by any stretch of the imagination. And as a leader that needs to think about a set of customers that spans ages, spans all sorts of demographics, I know it's something you've been analyzing. Can you share some of what you've learned from analyzing some of that data, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Thanks for having me this afternoon. This is a really interesting topic for me in particular. As you mentioned, I came from Ally Bank most recently. And for those of you who are familiar with Ally, it has a pretty significant auto finance component, but also a digital-only retail bank. And so, in my purview and from my perspective, digital is a language I've been speaking for a long time, even though I'm not millennial or, Gen Z and beyond. As I came to Comerica, which for those of you who may not know, is a 170-year-old bank here in the US with a primarily commercial focus. Very, very different in a lot of ways, a lot of context. And as I imagined what my first year would be like, it's very different than what this past year has been. Certainly COVID plays a big role. I haven't yet kind of met my team in person as I started in late March. But what occurred to me really as I started with Comerica is that we were no longer needing to focus on that, attracting that millennial, that next gen consumer. My daughter who's 17 was teaching my dad who's 70 plus how to grocery shop from his phone. That was a pivotal moment, right? Barriers to digital adoption were dissolving out of necessity. There was that point in time, March, April, and unfortunately, again, to different degrees now, where it just wasn't safe for him to leave his house. And when your four walls are really the only place where you find safety, you all of a sudden, out of necessity, begin to do things like adopt the ability to grocery shop online. So for me, the big takeaway was, as you think about that kind of demographic difference, attracting new customers from emerging demographics versus retaining your existing customers across all. That idea of the 21st century consumer, as my former boss used to describe it, really came to the forefront. And so to the extent that Comerica has a slightly different business model and certainly has a rich heritage and legacy as a relationship bank, finding that balance to be able to augment those relationship capabilities with those things that are really digital that help a new business model emerge.
That's interesting. Staying with you for just a moment more, and by the way, I can only imagine your excitement in recognizing that you were no longer the help desk for your father, but your daughter was. That must have also been thrilling for you. So yours is certainly not a digital native organization. You mentioned you're more than a century old. This is quite a cultural transformation. Mind you, I'm sure a transformation that's been happening since before the 10 or 11 months ago that you joined. But as you mentioned, it was not a digital first bank in perhaps some ways that Ally itself, of course, an organization that also went through a transformation under your leadership. Can you talk a little bit about sort of deciphering a little bit of, I realize it's a broad topic potentially, but some of the key areas that an organization like yours transformed in order to change the organization and its culture more towards where business was going as opposed to where it's been?
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt. And I think what's key here is sort of one of the last things I just mentioned, which is honoring that rich legacy and tradition as a relationship bank. That's how our bread has been buttered for a very long time. You can't abandon that and all of a sudden turn to a fully automated approach to your customers. It's not what they expect. And it's not what we're best at, to be frank. So during this time frame, how do we really think about omni-channel? How do we really think about ensuring that we have, from a technology perspective, the ability to connect all of the touch points that a customer may have with us in real time to make a more seamless experience? We're not there yet completely. I don't want to pretend like over the last year or even the great work that was done prior to my joining that we're done. I don't actually think anybody is, to be honest. But planting those seeds, seeing those use cases that have become very, very real, we're understanding that someone who starts a transaction on one of our digital properties, may need contextual help in chat and may then need to move from chat to an actual call center interaction. And they don't want to start all over again and explain everything they've been through. None of that's new per se, but I will tell you that given those emerging use cases, it's become much more real. And as a result, I think we can all put ourselves in the driver's seat in terms of being able to understand, what you would most want out of an experience and build that into the experiences that we're bringing forward for our customers.
I like that empathetic note that you're talking about, and almost the golden rule applied to the way in which you think about products and how they would be unrolled. Catherine, I mentioned that you are the global head of ventures, digital innovation, and partnerships at HSBC. Newer to your role even than Megan is to hers. You're a couple of months into that post, so I realize there's a great deal of dynamism going on there at the moment. When you and I caught up recently, you talked about how you're driving group level efforts to uncover new profit pools, alternative business models, while leading changes from the outside in. And as I mentioned, still relatively early in your tenure, but I wonder if you could share some of your early thinking about how best to foster the development of new profit pools, as you put it, and alternative business models.
Yeah, absolutely. And I resonated with what Megan said. Comerica is a 150-year-old bank. Same as the HSBC. HSBC is a 155-year-old bank. And we are in 65 countries, and we have $2.7 trillion assets under management. And we have 235,000 people worldwide. So really, when I look at across the globe, in my short tenure here, there's innovation happening everywhere. Pockets of innovation at all stages. It's everywhere. My role is to really harness entire groups' innovation and make sure that we really bet on the right big bets and drive the group's agenda forward. Right? We are a big, humongous elephant. So how do we teach the elephant to dance and the dance at the speed which the outside world is dancing, and then not only keep up with the outside world, but also play a leadership role, because our name and reputation, our global importance, frankly, we are the largest trade finance provider in the world. Every one of the 2 ocean liners in the ocean is financed by HSBC. So we're really carrying the weight of the global world order. And so it's both an obligation and obviously financially and societal wise. So when we identify the new profit pools, we really want to take a page from 2 or 3 worlds. One is cross-industry. So we do not just look at the financial services. We look at the giant, the big tech, right? So we have strategic partnerships with the likes of Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. So that's one more dimension. The second dimension is we look at the East. So as we all know, a lot of the innovations happening in the East, particularly China and Singapore. With the likes of Alibaba, Tencent and the Ping An, where they have these, I would say, less respect for banks. Stay in the bank lane. Banks can swim in other lanes, in the social, in e-commerce, in gaming, really we see a convergence of many, I would say, verticals playing in one super app, if that's a simple analogy I can use. So we want to understand the implication of those business models and how does it translate to the Western culture. So we obviously are deep rooted as a British bank, but how do we really adapt to the new world where the consumers or the clients are expecting, universal accessibility of the finance, whether for consumer and for business, all in the immersive experience of the point of needs, right? Whether being point of sales at the retail, either e-commerce or physical store, or it's Microsoft's, say the point of sale purchasing of the next generation cloud service. So we really want to be everywhere embedded into the point of needs. So that's right. We look at other industry. We look at the East. And then we also look at frankly, I would say where the FinTech, right, really particularly FinTech, where the edge is. So the center is always slow. When I came to HSBC, we said every single person, it's not just innovations team's job to do innovation. Every single person has a job to do innovation. And the innovation team also has a job to do BAU. So innovation got to happen everywhere. So we look at where the FinTech is. They're always faster and agile, and we really want to take outside-in perspective to drive what they're seeing into the center and really make us better and more fit. So those are the dimensions by which we're looking at where the next profit pool is coming from.
That's fantastic. I appreciate you giving that overview. So you've talked about your vision of establishing these ecosystems, my words, not yours, but I think that fairly encapsulates this notion that you're describing so eloquently. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your own philosophy about innovation within the enterprise. Before your time at HSBC, again, in role now about 2 months, you were the EVP and head of the consumer bank at East West Bank. You were a partner at 3 different major consulting firms before, and through that role, influenced a great number of organizations around the world. There are those who say that innovation should be everyone's responsibility. The cynic might say, well, if it's everyone's responsibility, it's really no one's. There are others that say that a small cadre of people ought to have that as their sole focus and certainly draw insights from others as well. Talk a bit about what you've seen work best, the extent to which you can paint with a bit of a broad brushstroke.
So there's really no right answer. I think it's whichever organization find a way that make it work for them. And what I think, and I resonate with one of the speakers, points in terms of it got. So what we're doing at HSBC is, so frankly, it doesn't matter, and we don't want to be a police role. I personally hate the word of governance. So governance means you don't trust, empower whoever the edge is. So I don't think it's a governance. It's more about orchestration and creating the network. Apple Store, look at the Apple Store, right? Apple doesn't govern a particular app. Apple put out the store, and whoever want to thrive on the store, it needs to be abide by the rules, right? Certain rules, how to play on the network, and then you play. So there's a duplication of apps. There's a sort of I would say the competition of the apps. But we're all actually driving toward the greatness of the whole, right? Overall, so with certain compromises. So I think our role internally is to provide that guardrail, the standards, or the big do's and don'ts, and make sure that people can see the big picture while moving forward. Innovation, right? Ultimately, people have to pay price. It fast fail forward. So as long as we fail forward, learn from the previous lessons, and then understand how do we, earn the permission to go forward. That's what we're striving for. So I think your pointed questions on how do we drive internal innovation. We really want to take both outside in, right? Leveraging outside the ecosystem partner. That's given for sure. We cannot just put the blinders on. Internally, we want to have a very business-led, use case-driven approach to be agile. It's not just IT agile. It got to be business use case driven agile. Business, technology, right? We put a cross-disciplinary team together, it's not perfect everywhere, but it's business plus technology plus compliance plus risk plus I say enabling functions together. And it's decision makers, senior decision makers, and content owners. Less of a sort of PM and do the process checks, status checks. It's about content. Do we have a valuable solution? Do we have the right people in the room? And in startups, you see super days, right? Super days is where 10 people, product to tech to compliance, sitting in one room, and we're going to launch this thing with or without, a bunch of resources or luxury of time. This weekend. So how do we really, that's the page I want to take from the smaller places to HSBC. Yep. And obviously mitigating the risk and all the things we have to do as a big, gigantic bank, but still move at a faster pace. So change culture one time a day.
Great. That's a great overview there, Catherine. Thank you so much. Megan, we have just a couple of minutes left. I want to give you the last word here. Despite the crisis, there's still a war for talent that is very much raging. And that war for talent is now on many different fronts. An employee in Detroit, where you are based, can now seek work more actively and more successfully than in years past in a place like the Bay Area or Manhattan, or name another city, London, if they're willing to do the hours of a different country, and they have the opportunity to think about things a little bit differently. You've developed some non-traditional talent pools, I know, as you've thought a little bit more about ways to fill in those gaps. Can you take just in the sort of 90 seconds we have left, can you give a brief overview of that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to your point, we have a broader swath of the market now that's addressable for us from a talent perspective. Geography isn't the barrier it once was, as you said, but neither should some other demographics. I mean, for us, we've been very focused on, partnering with other groups here in the Metro Detroit area, getting women back to work who are interested in rejoining the workforce after a break for whatever reason they may have had. Veterans, programs for differently abled talent. In particular, we're working with a couple of partners that have specialized training programs for people on the autism spectrum who are training for work in cybersecurity or in application development and so on, software engineering. And so from our perspective, it's really looking at all of the demographics and thinking about how to break down barriers that have not traditionally enabled certain segments of what should be the addressable workforce to do work, in technology, in operations, in cybersecurity, and so on. Yeah. So we've been really excited about putting some of those programs together, creating a value proposition around that, because just as the folks in Detroit have the opportunity to work in other parts of the world, so goes that people in other parts of the world have the opportunity to work for Comerica, and we want to be an employer of choice.
That's fantastic. Well, Megan Crespi, Catherine Zhou, thank you so much for this great conversation, sharing a bit of your perspectives of how you've managed through these challenging times, how you've personally done so as well, onboarding at your different companies during a time of quarantine. Best of luck to you both, and thank you so much for a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.